try to come back later on with that one, maybe more one-on-one when we're later, we can answer that a bit better. Okay, I'm working this way now.
So a short question, possibly a longer answer. What is your stand on Israel?
Okay, let me see if I got this down into 2 sentences once.
Can you repeat the question?
The question is, what is your stand on Israel? I'm trying to think how I worded this when I sent an email, because we had to bring this down to 2 sentences. Canada had no greater friend, it was said, Israel had no greater friend than Canada when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister. I very much hope the same thing will be said of Canada when I'm Prime Minister. Does that make it simple in 2 sentences?
Can I ask a couple specifics that are yes, no?
You can do some follow-ups, yeah.
Moving the embassy, two-state solution, settlements.
Embassy, I actually don't really have a perspective on that one. I'm not opposed to it for political reasons, but I am pretty cheap. And with the security you actually need to do that, you're talking a $200-300 million operation by the time you're done. So while I don't have any political objection to doing it, I'm a pragmatic guy, and if it works where it's got now, I probably wouldn't put it as a priority. Two-state, one-state solution. I don't think Canada really needs to pick the solutions for what works for the people there. Frankly, the biggest impediment right now to any sort of solution there is the leadership, political leadership on the Palestinian side. They do not want to have a deal. I'll make a couple observations, and first I'll tell a little story here. When people say that you shouldn't have Jewish settlements on the West Bank, one of the illustrations that's often given is, Hebron is one of the places that you shouldn't actually go. That's all Arab, there's no Jewish settlement around there. And so I remember someone was telling me about that, and I said, yeah, in 1930, there wasn't any Jewish settlements there. But you got to realize just a few years before that, there was, and they all got massacred. Okay? So some areas where you say no one was or belongs to certain people or back and forth, yeah, it depends which year you pick as your starting line. So the history is all complicated. So my viewpoint is this: they're going to have to settle it locally, whatever issue they do. Until you actually get 2 willing partners, nothing substantive is going to happen. At this point, there is only 1 willing partner in the region. So, you make the best of what you have, but until the Palestinian leadership actually gets some realistic politicians leading who actually want a solution, because they have no interest in a solution. The violence actually helps propagate their political power. You're not going anywhere. So, we'll be supportive, we'll do whatever we can, but I don't think there's any point us spending a lot of energy on something that, until you get 2 people at the table, it's not going anywhere. So we'll support our friends and go from there. Well, I think it's the right answer, so. Okay, gentleman down there hasn't asked a question.
Your marijuana smoking friend in Ottawa there said a definite no to the Northern Gateway pipeline.
He was smoking dope at the time?
No. Known fact that he does that. What is your view on the Northern Gateway pipeline?
First of all, private industry decides which pipelines goes through. Other than that, the government needs to just set out the regulations and get it to go. I kind of suspect the guys who are backing the Northern Gateway will never fund it again. If we had been in government, we would have absolutely had all the priorities taken care of to get it done, all the regulation, all the paperwork, everything would have done. And had there been a conservative government led by Brad Trost in place at the time, I think it would be built. But you can't blame businessmen for saying, I don't want to go there now that I've been sabotaged by the Liberals. So we'll see going forward. Just to follow up on this, people often go, well, you guys didn't get pipelines built when you were in government. Not true. 4 major pipelines were built when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister. People all ask about the Keystone pipeline, they're asking about the Keystone XL pipeline. The original Keystone, the Clipper pipeline, a couple others were built. Where we start to have problems with Northern Gateway, in my opinion, is not the pipeline. We began to spend political capital on nonsense like the Mike Duffy affair, little issues we were having in Ottawa, stuff that had nothing to do with political principle. And when you begin to spend political capital on nonsense like that, you cannot spend your time making the case to the Canadian people on things that are substantive. So when people ask me what stopped the Northern Gateway pipeline, I think frankly, one of the problems was we got off message, and instead of doing the things that Canada was interested in, we got involved in the usual nonsense of Ottawa. And if we don't get involved in that, it's a lot easier for us to sell our agenda to the Canadian people. Does that help? Okay. I just want to check that I haven't missed anyone over here. So I will go to a couple more questions here because we need to figure out. Then I see a hand over there and then over here. And then what time is it? It's 8 o'clock, and then I'm going to be out of my whistle here, and we'll go from there and I'll talk with people individually. So a couple more.
Okay, so, well, I'm all for it. You said about trying to get rid of CBC, but somebody was asking that, since the government is CBC part of the economic platform, has there been any quantitative analysis to validate positive economic output of the CBC?
The positive economic output of the CBC.
Somebody else is asking this.
Okay. Yeah, you're denying this all over the place. So, look, the CBC and the expenditures on it, an economist would refer to it as consumption. Okay. I would say it's not very good consumption, but you know, having said that, I used to love watching hockey. I mean, in the two-channel universe way back when. And I'll confess, I actually have Hockey Night in Canada cufflinks with say CBC on them. Yeah, I like my hockey. Look, it's consumption spending. You could get the same economic effect of just handing out $1 billion across the street because there's no new good that produces. If you spent that $1 billion, say you needed a bridge to get stuff transported from one to the other, you would actually create economic wealth by building a bridge because of increased productivity. So the CBC qualifies not as infrastructure, not as capital spending, not as investment, but as pure consumption. If we spent $1 billion on chocolates and gave them away on Halloween to children, it would have the exact same economic impact. So, yeah. Okay, we're letting her, she's got all these emails. Ask another one. And I prefer the chocolate in my viewpoint, so. How do we treat the refugee versus the skilled immigrant? Okay. Let me first deal with what I think on refugee policy, and then ask me again on skilled immigrant. You know, in Canada we have two categories basically of refugees. We have private sponsorships, and we have government paid for system. Okay? Private sponsorships were brought in Canada back in the era of the Vietnamese boat people coming to Canada. What you do is you have 5 Canadians who get together and say, we are going to be responsible. Thank you for coming. I know you got to go. Very much appreciated. Remember to vote for the guy at the bottom of the letter there.
We vote you. You are number one.
There you go. Go online to donate while you're at it. So. Private refugee sponsorships was a Canadian innovation. 5 people have got to sponsor them. They fund it. They take care of it. It costs the taxpayer nothing, unless you're one of the 5 people who's doing the sponsorship. It was a brilliant idea. From a social integration perspective, you have 5 good friends when you move to Canada. They help you, they teach you, they take you shopping, they do all sorts of things with you. They make sure you don't get into trouble. It's incredible. And you know what? From the finance minister's perspective, it's free. So you know what our friends the Liberals have done? Because it doesn't cost the taxpayer anything, they've said, whoa, that's not good. And they've capped the number of private refugee sponsorships in Canada at 2,000 for this year. Okay? Not the cold, heartless conservatives stopping refugees from coming to Canada, our friends the Liberals. Okay? But they're then taking all their money and they're selecting and concentrating almost all their refugee, government-sponsored, on Syria. Now, I'll be pretty blunt on this. I think the Liberals are deliberately going after one ethno-cultural demographic group because they figure if all those people come in, someday they will owe their vote to us. Okay? That's what they're doing. Okay? My church sponsored refugees from Syria. They were set up under the previous conservative government. I think we've done 2 of them, and a family from Eritrea now. So I'm not opposed to bringing in refugees from Syria. Interestingly, they were a Christian couple, the first one that came. I think the Eritreans would be too, because they're Orthodox. So I'm not opposed to the concept. But why are we doing that? I think let's take the cap off on the private sponsorship and start to wean ourselves away from the whole government-sponsored refugee thing. Because a lot of these people are having a really difficult time. We had a bunch of them in our office this last week. They're having a difficult time adjusting, they're having a difficult time integrating, they're having a difficult time finding work. The private system does better security system because you know what? The 5 people who are sponsoring, they tend to actually sort out who and what. Because you still go through security checks, but it's an extra layer to make sure security is there on the refugees. It does better cultural, it does better economically. I was talking about this because I had the same question when I was in Richmond Hills in Ontario. And one of the guys came up to me afterwards and said, you know what? My family were the Vietnamese boat people. And you were right. It made us Canadians here today. I was looking at the guy, we had a talk. He had a Rolex on his wrist. So I thought, he did pretty good based upon the system. And it didn't cost the government anything. So in the refugee system, we need to transition from the government sponsorship, because frankly, the dollars we're spending would be better spent helping people in refugee camps, and go to a private system, which we get a larger variety of people from around the world, which is what the Liberals don't want, because if people come from everywhere, and they're brought here by people, they don't owe their political allegiance to a certain political party or government that brought them in. Now, from the Liberals' perspective, that's a problem. So, that's why I want to move the system that way. Skilled immigrants, boy, you're going to have to ask a much more detailed question than that, because there's all sorts of categories for skilled immigrants.
Somebody's asking that, because we're talking about traditional Canadian values, and so somebody's asking that, will that be a student's line on the skilled immigrant application in the future, just to screen for that family?
I honestly am not quite sure what's being asked there. That might be a little bit of a blending of Kelly Leach's position with the general immigration. I'll just observe this. My experience with the immigration system is really personal, okay? My mother-in-law lives with me. She's from Mongolia. My wife immigrated to Canada in 2003. She came here on a scholarship to do her master's at the University of Saskatchewan. And she ended up marrying me after, she did what good immigrants are supposed to do when they come to Canada. She joined the Conservative Party and went out there to work for an MP's re-election. And so I had to follow up with my campaign volunteer and say thank you to her. And I was better at saying thank you to her than I was with a lot of others. I've observed watching her, and 3 of my sister-in-laws now, her little sister, a sister-in-law I have that's in Lethbridge from Colombia, and then my sister-in-law in Vancouver who's from central China coming through. It really works better, it's easier when you're younger when you immigrate, and when you have good language skills, okay? Those are just the obvious of obvious. Those are a couple of skills. And even youth is, frankly speaking, a skill. Now, I've seen some people who have done fairly well when they've come when they're over 40. But one of the big things you need in life to get ahead is a network. And your network builds as you grow and get older in life. It is just really tough if you're in your 40s or 50s to come. My mother-in-law, who's living with us, doesn't have good language skills. She's not really going to establish stuff, but we're responsible for her financially and so forth. And she's got a really nice suite in the basement and does well. But you do screening in that way. You have to, because